Hey everybody, it's Damien from Guitar Journey here, and today we're going to take a really important step forward in your understanding of music theory. Today we're going to learn how to construct chords. And if you put today's lesson into practice, this is going to make you not only a better rhythm player, but it's also going to make you a better and more confident lead player as well. When we say we're going to learn how to construct chords, what we really mean is we're going to learn how to figure out the specific individual notes that make up a given chord. So, for example, if we think of an A minor chord, what three notes put together combine to give us that A minor chord? Now, if we try to memorize the individual notes that make up every chord out there, we'd just go crazy. It would just be completely overwhelming. And honestly, if we really try to memorize every single chord formula out there all at once, that's doable, but it would be a really big task. Okay, so instead, what we're going to do is we're going to learn the formulas for just 4 types of chords. And what you're going to find is that these 4 chord formulas, if you get very good at applying them, that these are going to give you the foundation later on to make a tremendous variety of chords, okay? The reason these specific 4 chord formulas are so important is because when we're in a given key, for all the crazy chords you might see out there with all these numbers attached to them, 9, 13, whatever, when you're in a given key, you're really going to see only 4 different general types, or you might say categories of chords. That's an oversimplification, but it's actually pretty accurate. So if we learn to assemble those 4 types of chords, they can then be extended or altered in some way to cover just about any chord out there. So learning to construct those 4 chord types is our goal for today. Now you may be wondering, hey, knowing this stuff is great, it's interesting, whatever, but what do I actually do with this information? I'm going to suggest to you that knowing these formulas, as I said, will not only make you a better rhythm player with a more varied and more nuanced chord knowledge, but also a better lead player as well. Now, with respect to being a better rhythm player, if you know these formulas and you're able to assemble chords on the fly, find them on your fretboard, you can use more creative chord voicings. And as you move from chord to chord, you can have really nice, elegant, what we call voice leading. That is the movement of the individual notes that make up one chord to the individual notes that make up another chord. Your rhythm playing will be much more tasteful, even melodic. Okay, and so for example, let's just say that I'm going to play an E minor 7 flat 5 and an A7 chord going to a D minor 7 chord. And I can play them in root position like this, and they sound really just fine. But I can also play them in different shapes across the neck, and maybe this is another nice way of doing them. My E minor 7 flat 5, my A7, D minor 7. And that's a very elegant way to play it. And you'll also be able to embrace concepts like chord-scale compatibility, where you'll be able to make alterations to whatever scale you're playing in to accommodate and work with the notes that are in the individual chord that might be being played underneath. So for example, if I'm soloing in the key of A minor, right, the notes in the key of A minor are just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But for example, I see an E7 chord, an E dominant 7. I can recognize right away that E7 chord has a G sharp in it, and I can incorporate that G sharp into my soloing such that my A minor scale becomes basically the A harmonic minor scale. On top of that, you'll be able to find arpeggios much more easily on the neck and incorporate them into scale passages. By way of example, if I'm playing in the key of A minor and I want to throw in an A minor 7 arpeggio, I can find it right here, and I can go into like an A minor scale passage right from there. Okay, so knowing these chord formulas is just incredibly useful, both for the rhythm playing and for your lead playing. So let's get right to the heart of things and learn our 4 chord formulas, okay? The 4 chords we're going to learn about today are a major 7 chord, a dominant 7 chord, a minor 7 chord, and what we call a minor 7 flat 5 chord. And sometimes that minor 7 flat 5 chord will be called a half diminished chord, okay? Right off the bat, you might be saying, well, I'm a rock player and I don't play 7 chords, okay? And that's totally fine, but try to keep in mind that whether you actively play 7 chords or even more extended chords, 9s, 11s, 13s, whatever, knowing the notes that make up these chords will give you more options as a lead player, okay? So again, this is not just for rhythm playing, it's for lead playing as well. And also, try to take this on faith, but if you never think about the 7th note in a chord, you're kind of missing out on a note that forms a critical part of the identity, the function of a given chord. That's a really deep topic. We don't have the time to get into it today, but just really please trust me on that. The 7th tone is an important part of the identity of a chord. And finally, just one last time, I've said this in many of my videos, I don't believe these deeper chords are just for, jazz or whatever. Play them in rock, play them in blues, they sound great, okay? It's unfortunate that people have this mindset that these deeper chords are only for jazz. Just not true, okay? All right, so these 4 chords, okay, you're gonna run into major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, and minor 7 flat 5, okay? Now, in order to assemble these chords, you do need to know your chromatic scale extremely well. Your chromatic scale, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, that thing, okay? And you need to be very comfortable with it. A lot of times people say, oh yeah, I know that, but they're not as comfortable applying it as they really need to be, okay? Now, to help you get the most out of today's lesson, I'm putting a downloadable PDF of the chromatic scale in the description to this video below, okay? Now, on top of that, it would be a good idea, not totally necessary, but a good idea if you had a comfort level with the idea, with the concept of different musical intervals. Interval is just like the distance between 2 notes, from one note to the other note. I have a whole video on that, and I'm going to put the link to that video in the description below. It's not absolutely necessary to be able to follow along with today's video, but it can be quite helpful, okay? So each of the chords we're going to look for today consists of 4 different notes. And each of these chords is going to have what we call a root note and what we call a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th. Root note is just what the chord is named after, right? So if we're talking about like an A major 7 chord, well, the root note is going to be A. What else would it be? The 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th are additional notes that we add to the root to give the chord its identity, okay? So let's get started with our first formula. The first chord we're going to learn is A major 7, okay? And as you see on the screen, a major 7 chord will have a root note, and then we're going to have what we call a major 3rd, a perfect 5th, and a major 7th. Now, just a quick aside, this page with the chord formulas, you knew what I was going to say, downloadable PDF in the description below. Now, in order to figure out the specific notes that are going to be our major 3rd, our perfect 5th, our major 7th, we're going to use the interval guide that you're seeing on screen, and that's going to be available as a PDF download as well. So, what you can see is that what we call a major 3rd is going to be 4 half steps. And remember, on guitar, 4 half steps is 4 frets. A half step is 1 fret on guitar. So a major 3rd is going to be 4 half steps above the root note. And we also see that a perfect 5th is going to be 7 half steps above the root note. And a major 7th is going to be 11 half steps above the root note. So with all that in mind, let's do an example. We're going to assemble an A major 7 chord. Well, the root note is no problem, right? If we're talking about an A major 7 chord, the root note will be A, okay? And again, we see that a major 7 chord consists of a major 3rd, which is 4 half steps above the root. Well, 4 half steps above A, let's count it out on the chromatic scale, and that brings us to a C sharp note. Okay, our major 3rd from A will be C sharp. How about a perfect 5th? Well, a perfect 5th is 7 half steps above the root note. And as we follow this, you'll see that a perfect 5th, 7 half steps above our root note of A, brings us to an E note. And finally, last up is our major 7th. And our major 7th, 11 half steps above our root note of A, brings us to a G sharp note. So our A major 7 chord consists of the notes A, C sharp, E, and G sharp. Now before we do any more formulas, let's do one more example, okay? And I can promise you that after we do this next example, things are actually going to get much easier, and you're going to see why. Okay, let's put together an E major 7 chord. All right, well, my root note's going to be E. That's easy enough. How about my major third? Remember, major third is 4 half steps above the root. What's 4 half steps above E? Well, we count it out and we see that our major third is going to be G sharp. G sharp. All right, our perfect fifth. Remember, the perfect fifth is 7 half steps above the root. Let's count it out from E. And where does that bring us? It brings us to a B note. So our perfect fifth from E is going to be B. Finally, our major seventh. Remember, the major seventh is 11 half steps above the root note. What note is 11 half steps above E? Our major seventh is a D sharp note. D sharp. So our E major 7 chord will consist of the notes E, G sharp, B, and D sharp. And that's the formula for a major 7 chord. Now, let's continue with the other 3 formulas. And for all of these examples, I'm going to stay with a root note of E, and you're going to see why in just a moment. So we already know that an E major 7 chord is E, G sharp, B, and D sharp. How about an E dominant 7 chord? Well, let's look at our chord formula. What do we see as the formula for a dominant 7 chord? As it turns out, there's only one note difference between a major 7 chord and a dominant 7 chord. Looking at our chord formulas, we can see that a major 7 chord has, as we said, a root note, a major third, a perfect fifth, and a major seventh. A dominant 7 chord has a root note, a major third, a perfect fifth, but instead of the major 7, it has what we call a minor 7. That's the only difference between the 2 chords, the major 7 versus the minor 7. So when we look at our intervals worksheet, we see whereas the interval of a major 7 is 11 half steps, 11 frets above the root, the interval of a minor 7 is 10 half steps, 10 frets above the root. So think back a moment when we put together our E major 7 chord. Do you remember the notes were E, G sharp, B, and D sharp? Well, the root note of E, the major third of G sharp, and the perfect fifth of B are going to be the same in our dominant 7 chord as well. But there's a minor 7 now, a minor 7 instead of a major 7. Our minor 7, 10 half steps above the root, gives us a D natural. And so our E dominant 7 chord consists of E, G sharp, B, and D. Now, just a quick review. And compare our E major 7 was E, G sharp, B, D sharp. E dominant 7, E, G sharp, B, D natural. The only difference between the 2 chords, the major 7 versus the minor 7, that is the D sharp or the D natural. Okay? That's our dominant 7 formula. 2 down, 2 to go. Let's keep the same root note of E and let's talk about an E minor 7 chord. And we see that a minor 7 chord consists of a root note, a minor third, a perfect fifth, and a minor 7th. We'll compare that to the E dominant 7. Compare that to the dominant 7 chord we just figured out a moment ago. The only difference between these 2 chords, dominant 7 and minor 7, is that the dominant 7 chord has a major third, whereas the minor 7 chord, as you would expect, has a minor third. Well, again, just by way of review, our E dominant 7, remember, consisted of a root note of E, a major third of G sharp, a perfect fifth of B, and a minor 7 of D. Well, what's our E minor 7 chord going to be? The root note will be the same, E, but our minor third, when we look at our intervals worksheet, we see that a minor third is 3 half steps above the root note. A major third is 4 half steps above the root note, but a minor third is only 3 half steps above the root note. So what note is 3 half steps above our root note of E? The answer is a G note, G natural. And after that, things are pretty straightforward because our perfect fifth is B, just like it was for our major 7 and our dominant 7 a few moments ago. And our minor 7th is still D, just like it was for that dominant 7 chord just a moment ago. So E minor 7 will consist of E is our root note, minor 3rd of G, perfect 5th of B, and a minor 7th of D natural. And just like that, we have only one formula to go. We need to figure out our E minor 7 flat 5 chord. And just for a minute, take a moment and think about the name of that chord, E minor 7 flat 5. We just figured out E minor 7. What do we suppose is going to be the difference between a minor 7 chord and a minor 7 flat 5 chord? Yeah. Whereas the regular E minor 7 has a perfect fifth, our E minor 7 flat 5 will have a flatted, or what is sometimes called a diminished fifth. So when we put our E minor 7 flat 5 chord together, root note is still going to be E, minor 3rd is still going to be G. But as you can see, where a perfect fifth is 7 frets, 7 half steps above the root note, a diminished fifth or a flatted fifth is only 6 half steps above the root note. What note is 6 half steps above our root note of E? The answer is B flat. And that kind of makes sense. If it's a perfect fifth, 7 half steps above our root gave us a B note, then 6 half steps, a flatted fifth or a diminished fifth, if you want to call it that, will be a B flat note. So E minor 7 flat 5 is going to consist of the notes E, G, B flat, and D. And just like that, we've learned our 4 foundational chord formulas. Now, in terms of practicing these, I recommend you start with a single given root note and work all 4 chord formulas in the order we did them today. Major 7, then dominant 7, then minor 7, then minor 7 flat 5. And if you do that, you'll notice something right away, and you may have noticed it during today's lesson. When we go from a major 7 to a dominant 7 chord, there's only one different note, the major 7 versus the minor 7. When we go from our dominant 7 chord to our minor 7 chord, there's only one different note, the major 3rd versus the minor 3rd. And when we go from our minor 7 chord to our minor 7 flat 5 chord, there's only one different note, the perfect 5th versus the flatted or the diminished 5th. So when you're just getting started figuring out these chord formulas, it can be very helpful to practice them in the order that we did them today. And like just about anything, it's going to take a lot of practice for you to get comfortable with these. But if you put the time in, you will eventually get comfortable with these. And as we discussed earlier, you can use these chord formulas in a variety of ways, not just rhythmically, but also when you're soloing as well. This is just really great, deeper knowledge to have on hand. So remember to download the PDFs from the description below, practice these as often as you can, and get started gradually applying them in your playing, okay? All right, that's what I have for you today. If you enjoyed today's content, please hit the like button and also hit the subscribe button. There's a ton of content of every sort here on the Guitar Journey channel, from jam tracks to music theory lessons to playing tips to pathways to help you navigate the awesome journey that is learning and playing the guitar. So please hit like and please hit subscribe. And if you'd like to as well, please leave me a comment. We're building a community here, and I really believe that we can all learn from each other and we can enrich each other's respective guitar journeys. Thanks so much and have a great day.